Blog Talk Radio.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is?
Julie.
Huh?
Julie.
Huh? Guess what day it is?
Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is?
Anybody? Anybody?
Mike.
Huh?
What day is it, Mike?
Huh? Woo-hoo!
Leslie, guess what today is? Leslie, guess what today is?
It's Hump Day.
Hump day!
It's Hump Day.
Hump day!
This is the Donelson Files. This is Tom Donelson with our special co-host tonight, Lauren Bice. Coco is, as we learned last night, she one of her short films is up for nomination for the Cannes Film Award, and it's also won quite a few awards in the Los Angeles area. And tonight she is on location in an unidentified place somewhere in LA, and she won't be able to join us, but she will join us Tuesday. But I'm Tom Donelson. I'm the chairman of America's PAC. I am a research associate and project director for America's Majority Foundation. And my good friend and the official European correspondent for the Donelson Files, Lauren Bice. Lauren, I'm going to let you, because I don't want to miss anything about you, because your resume is very extensive. So,
good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you again, Tom. My name is Lauren Bias, and I have just completed my graduate program here at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. It's good to be an American in Dublin, and I'm enjoying my time here. I'm a film studies scholar, and I'm also a playwright, and I have just completed a documentary called The Letters, and it is an avant-garde documentary, and it's really an interesting take on seeing the images in relation to the poetic journey, showing the different people that come to Dublin from all over the world, the artists, the intellectuals, and what it takes to be a multicultural individual, not just coming to Dublin, but all people when they decide to uproot themselves and go to another country. Not easy, but how you're not alone, and you always find a kindred soul. So it's one of three parts. So it's a progression of what it takes when you first move someplace, and then you move to the second part and into the third part. And it's been very well received, and we'll be having our premiere in a couple of months. So it's good to be with you all this evening, and we're going to have a very interesting discussion.
yes, we are. First of all, I want to kind of tell the audience that last night we, because originally we had kind of an original schedule, but everything went to in the business and the radio and internet business, ever so often you got situations like in the case we had a guest coming on last night, but she lives in Oklahoma, and her town got terrorized by major storms and tornadoes. And she said we were cleaning. We were cleaning up trees and everything and messes every place. So she was, said she could not make it with us tonight. So we basically had two interesting discussions. First one was on abortion. And I want to kind of have people listen to that discussion, and I'll tell you later how to go back on that, mainly because it was an interesting discussion that Coco and I had, totally different, disagreements, but there were areas of agreement as well and worth listening to. And then we got into China and basically the social credit system that they are adopting, which is kind of an Orwellian vision of the world. And we're going to follow up with that tonight because I think it's vitally important to do so. And Lauren, as usual, I have to thank you very much, Lauren, for agreeing to come on the air because it is, 11 o'clock your time?
Yes, it's after 11 my time, correct.
So I hope, so we are keeping Lauren up.
That's all right. I'm happy to be here.
So, but here's the thing. There are three. I'm going to start off with three stories, and then we'll get into the discussion. Years ago, it was like about 30 years ago, and I was telling Lauren, ahead of time, when we were doing the show prep, is I had I was taking a computer course. It was one of those improve your computer skills type of deal. And so my company at the time paid for it. So, and I can remember after we finished the course, after we finished the course, we go out and have a couple of beers afterwards, kind of celebrate, the teacher and the students. And he started talking about the book of Revelation. And he got into, and he said, we talked about the, 666. And he said, there's going to be a time and a place where, people are going to be putting chips in you. You're going to have a computer. You're going to be in a cashless society. And unless you're on, and the government will be able to control you so much that just having the chip or having your computer is the only way you're going to be able to live and sustain yourself. In other words, he was presenting a very bleak picture. Mm-hmm. But it's a bleak picture that, Coco and I discussed last night that it may be coming upon us. And mm-hmm. and one of the things that Coco was telling me, this is kind of fascinating. Like she was saying, I bought a bunch of stuff online and said within 5 minutes of buying it on my computer, I'm getting ads for this place.
Yes. And
then and this is creepy. This is totally creepy. But last night she talks about, her experience in China. And she, mm-hmm. here we are, we're having this discussion. Finally said, oh my God, I just got an ad traveling to China. And it was like, and we're, it's so easy to be paranoid, and the black helicopter and all that. But tonight, we're going to have a little paranoia here because we live in a society today where, quite honestly, everything about you is out there. I mean, most of us have our banking information. We shop online. How many of us will read digital magazines or digital press? In effect, these people know everything about you to a point
Absolutely.
where...
it's really odd because I was on my iPhone and I was scrolling, going through through different things that I wanted to purchase. And there was a very unusual item that I wanted to buy. And it was something that normally I would never think to look at. And I didn't click on it, but it was just in the matter of I was scrolling through. But I took my time. Like, in other words, I stopped scrolling. Like, just the activity of my scrolling slowed. I just slowed. That's it. So, like, my thought process slowed. Well, somehow they knew, because in the next couple of days, that ad appeared everywhere. It appeared on all my social media. It appeared in YouTube. On everything, all my subscriptions, that exact ad pops up. And it's been like that for days.
Yeah. I gotta say, it's scary. Because we live in the way I kind of put it this way. Years ago, there was a politician, I won't name the individual, but what she said was brilliant in this sense. He said, we're going to end up losing our freedom little by little by little until mm-hmm. we wake up and there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. And I can always remember when, years ago, Reagan would made it very, there was a history book I read, and the historian, he begins the first, part. He said, we are one generation from greatness, but we're just one generation from barbarism.
I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah. It goes right into a straight line. And one of the things last night we were talking about the social credit, because what intrigued us with our discussion, and this is what I think I want to kind of get in with you, because Europe right now, there is a battle going on with Google. And I know you mentioned that Ireland is going to 5G,
mm-hmm.
converted over to 5G. And I know that there's a big battle going on with Google and the EU.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and to me, it's I kind of look at these companies, and we're talking about countries that the capitalization is in the trillions. Apple is a $1 trillion+ company with the iPhone. I mean, they're like nations. I mean, if they were companies were nations, they'd be part of the G7.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting aspect is the power that they control and hold over us in so many ways. But, in a way, China is kind of showing the future with their credit system. In effect, as I understand it, is, they're going to survey everything you do. If they look at what you do on Facebook, they look at what you do on Twitter, and they're basically keeping, are you a good citizen type of deal, much, Big Brother at its most awfulness. And I know
they're calling it a culture of sincerity. That's how they're marketing it, and that's what they're doing. They're marketing it as such, to establish China as a culture of sincerity, trying to make it like that. But what you're saying is correct. What they're really doing is just organizing their society and categorizing their so-called citizens. It's almost very robotic. That's what they're doing. It's a cyber way of organization. It's putting people in a digital, computerized manner. But what it does is it keeps people in a class system that really they will never be able to get out of, because once they're labeled, and that's, I remember, one of the articles you had sent me, once you're labeled, these so-called credits, if you don't achieve a certain number of credits, you can't make them up. It's almost like getting a bad credit score in the United States, although you could clean up your credit. We're all familiar with that. You can clean your credit up, but in China, you can't clean up this credit. You can't make up credit. Once you get a bad score, that's it. If you don't attain these credits, that's it. You're stuck in that level. But the ones that do, then they're like this upper echelon of society, and then they have the ability to you get the better jobs, the better housing. They have the educational system afforded to them. But everyone else, and that's horrible, because that becomes a generational problem. That's generational.
Yeah. Hold on to that thought. This is Tom Donelson Files, our special guest and the official European correspondent for the Donelson Files, Lauren Bice, on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
Yeah, that's the Dr. Larry Show. And tonight's show is going to be interesting. First of all, number one, because I'm going to be on the show. So that's, basically, yeah. So I'm going to be on the show. And we're going to be talking about what he calls conscious capitalism. And it's kind of a reformist, and basically, Dr. Larry's been doing a series on this for the past month. And what he's kind of looking at is kind of the evolution of capitalism in the 21st century, what it needs to do to reform, to evolve in this particular period. So it's, like I say, so it's been kind of fascinating. We're going to have a discussion on this as we pursue this issue further as part of his series. So that's going to be tonight following this show. Okay, you brought up something to me that dealt with Korea workers. Kind of share what you were trying to tell me.
Yeah, so I teach students English as a second language, and I have students of all different ages, but primarily I have adult students that I teach conversational English. So rather than teach a structured lesson plan, we discuss, current issues and that thing, because that's the easier way to learn English when you just discuss things. So they teach me their culture, and I talk about ours. So recently we were talking about the Korean culture in business, and they enlightened me to the fact that in their corporate environment, the way that it works is this relates to any gender. It is structured that although this is South Korea, although it is very it's a contemporary society, it is still ruled by what they consider the ancient culture, and that's how they refer to it. So in other words, the ones that are in say senior management, as we would say, senior management, the highly educated people, many people are educated in the United States, Harvard, MIT, and then they come back and they work in their corporate levels. But however, the way that their employees are treated, people just as educated, okay, they talk down to them, and the mindset is they will talk to them like they're the sinners. Like if you do something that is considered rude, or you're labeled or almost like given a bad score, and you will never be able to be given a higher job or better pay, and you will work at that job your whole life and considered beneath everybody else. So in that culture, you're still being treated like that. So what you were talking about before, if technology evolves now, say, to a culture like that, okay, like what China's doing, right? And we have chips that are put in, and all that is put in. What happens when you commingle that with belief systems that are still in play? Will people become so oppressed? What happens to that culture? I mean, really.
Yeah.
What do you think?
What you're really saying, and because here's the thing, I know, I'm going to assume you've read 1984.
Of course.
Yeah, and so have I. And I'm always kind of curious how many people could. So for me, it was it was like required reading in one of my classes, and it's something that I wish people really need to read, mainly because it's happening right here today. You make a good point about, let's say in Korea, you're basically put in a position where you can't get out of. You're born to the status you are. Certainly, one of the advantages over the years in the United States is, as Marco Rubio used to say, when my dad lived in Cuba at the time, what he was born is where he ended up. Whereas here, you always had that movement upwards, and that's so you basically are seeing world. We see it in China. What you're talking about in Korea. But it's starting to creep across what I say the Western Western civilization. And here's the thing. Think of it this way. We kind of talked about this briefly. Everything that you and I do is somewhere in the cyberspace. Where we shop, what we read, what we do. I mean, emails, internet, you name it. Whatever you put on Twitter, if anybody's on Facebook, whatever you put on Facebook, it's someplace, somewhere, somebody's got it.
Right.
You can't hide from it. And
no, every picture you take now, every single picture you take on your phone is automatically something that's going to be uploaded somewhere.
Yeah. And this
cool.
is and that's here's let me throw this out. Because in 2013, Admiral Clapper basically told congressional, no, don't worry about it. We're not spying on you. Only to find out later, the NSA was spying on us. And here's some of the things, this is last year. Our National Security Agency collected 534 million records of phone call and text messages last year. 534 million records. Let's
go for a minute. Let's go back to the Patriot Act. Remember when that was put into play?
Yeah.
And remember the fervor that went on. How all the civil rights activists came out and said they said it back then. I mean, we knew we had to do it in a sense because of 9/11. But remember the uproar and everybody saying we know we need it, but at the same time, this was going to be the indicator of what was yet to come. And in a sense, isn't that exactly what happened?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Here's the thing. I mean, to me, because I was one of those, because obviously part of it is that you have to trust your government to limit itself in its power, and you have to trust that there would be things put in place to do exactly, that it can't be done. And we're seeing now that that's not indeed the case. I mean, one of the issues, and again, it will be interesting as we go down the line, dealing with the FBI and the FISA courts, whether or not they have, to what extent they've abused it. But this is all part of it. And I always thought to myself, well, if you can go to a secret court and just, essentially say, well, whatever, and get a warrant, they're going to be spying on you just based on that alone. And we have to trust that there is things in place, and we're finding out that those things that we think should be in place, if they're in place, they're not being very well followed.
I'm going to say something that happened to me when I was in Colorado, which is where I was living.
Yeah.
In Sprint was my carrier for almost 13 years. I had it in Florida, then I moved to Colorado, and that's a long time to have a carrier, 13 years, same one. So I'm in Colorado, and I have my iPhone, and periodically in 6 years, all of a sudden I couldn't make any calls. I couldn't receive any in at all. I can make text messages, but people are texting me and say, Lauren, I can't call you. And it was a very odd thing, except when I would call out, I would get a message of it was a monotone voice, like a voicemail or a voice response. That would say, it would go bing bing, and it would just say you cannot make this call or something, but call this number. And I would call this number, and a human voice would come on and say, what is your Social Security number? Just like that. And I would say, who are you? Just give me your Social Security number. And I would say, who are you? This would happen all the time. And she goes, do you want your cell phone turned on or not? I said, what is this about? And she goes, this is a tower. I said, what tower? And she says, we'll put the switch back on, but we need your Social Security number. Now, a couple of times I was in such a rush getting to class, and I needed my phone on, that I did it. And sure enough, they put the phone back on. This went on a couple of times, more than a couple of times, over 6 years. And then at one point, I got so aggravated. I said, how do I know who you are? Are you the government? Are you monitoring us? And she got silent. And then I moved. So isn't that interesting?
That is. I mean, actually, because my first thought would have been, there's a scammer. Somebody is hacking into my phone. That's been my first thought. And I almost would have gone almost immediately to whatever the local store is. I mean, that's almost.
No, I did. I called Sprint, and they said that they heard something in their department that was happening with Sprint, but it was valid, but even they were not completely sure what it was about. And that was representative saying that.
Yeah, well, at that point, I'd be changing carriers.
Well, I mean, eventually
right.
I did. Eventually I got rid of my number moving here. Yeah. But that's the level that we're at.
Yeah, I mean, that's the level, because the thing that comes into play, I mean, this is the aspect that comes into play. It's in the sense that there's so much out there about you that it is so easy to have information that, let's face it, I mean, we all have our moments in which we probably took the wrong picture to put on Facebook or on our phones.
Mm-hmm.
And that's someplace, somewhere, somehow that can be used against you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at, like I say, it's at that, point. And that's just where I think, what people need to understand is where we're at. Where we're at. I mean, let me kind of get into another angle, but it kind of touches on the same thing. And it is this. My own, like I say, I'm not going to name the name of the social media.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a situation because I run a political organization. We put in
Mm-hmm.
some ads, and we had troubles. They were, we were having problems with. Something was kind of mixed because I'm expecting because they were basically taking money out of the account to pay for this. It was not. You don't give them a check and then they do it. It's they do it bits by pieces, and nothing was happening. So I'm calling up my associate who's working my social media side. So what the hell is going on? Nothing's going to happen. Then we get a letter saying, "Oh, you've been suspended, and not only have you been suspended, but don't bother calling us to tell you why because we're not going to tell you why. And if you use another IPS, we'll know it." I mean,
wow.
And so basically, I guess I got friends in media, and I kind of released that, and a couple of them did stories, and within a week, when anything happened, they said, "Oh, by the way, yeah, you're back on." But here's the thing. The argument has always been, well, these are private companies; they can do what they want, which is there's an element of truth to that. But when you're controlling 95% plus of your various, like Facebook controls 95%, Google controls 95%. Twitter's got a major in that particular market. And Instagram is essentially that's not Facebook, right? They're in effect determining who gets to be heard and who doesn't.
Right.
That's happening now. And that is in effect detrimental to political discussion because, quite frankly, if people can censor you, and I see this quite a bit on Twitter, where I've seen people, I look at, and I was, and there's nothing on there that you would indicate, well, they're hating, haters, or they're just, giving points of view or whatever, but they're certainly not haters, they're not racist, they're not bigots, and they disappear. Right. And I've had a couple of these people come back, and I got to a point where some of these people, if I have somebody I like, I said, hey, give me your email, so if you ever disappear, we can keep in contact.
Right.
But there is what
I think Twitter should do? I really think what Twitter should do is they should put an option in there. Like, how you're able to block like sexual content just for yourself. I think they should put an option in there, a filter that you're able to filter out certain topic content. So like you could filter out all political content, and then they could filter out even more specifically like U.S. political content. I really believe you can do that. And that's just mapping. That's basic computer mapping. That's not a big deal to do. Because if they did that... Go ahead.
Yeah. And that would be that's an interesting concept here because that gives you the freedom to do to put on what you want to put on.
Because this way, Twitter's not doing that. This way, just like China has the government that's dictating who can do what and how they do it. And then here in the United States, the people that are like basically owning social media and telling us what to do and who can do what, if we have the users, which is what we're doing, right, private people, we should have the ability to block ourselves. And this way, you don't have the user saying, Twitter blocked me, Twitter suspended me, right? We would all have more accountability as far as what we see.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And I want you to hold on to that thought because we're going to kind of follow up a little bit on that as we... So this is the Donelson Files. Tom Donelson with Lauren Bice, my special guest and the official European correspondent for the Donelson Files, and on part of the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
Hey, this is L.A. Bachelor reminding you if you're looking for real discussion on sports, politics, religion, and other topics, you need to join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern at WCOMFM.org, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. at blogtalkradio.com/LA-Bachelor, and on Thursdays at the same web address. Follow us on Facebook at Pad Nation, on Twitter, Pad Nation, the number 2 at Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email us with your requests, your comments, your concerns, anything you want at our email address at LABachelor with a T, BATCHELOR 40 at gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Pad Nation, Instagram, and of course, if you miss any part of our broadcast, make sure you go to thebachelorpadnetwork.com and listen and enjoy the Bachelor Pad.
Yeah, again, it's the Bachelor Pad show, the Bachelor Pad show with L.A. Bachelor, the man who basically formed our network, the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. And you can also, again, the BachelorPadRadioNetwork.com. You can listen not only to his show, but to our show as well. And as I stated last night, I think last night's show was one of those shows that you'll want to go back and listen to, because we had a great discussion on abortion we had, and we're now following the discussion we're doing today began late last night at the last 25 minutes of the show, dealing with the social credit system, the internet, the ability, and maybe are we asking the question, are we slowly losing our freedom? Now, you kind of make the interesting point what Twitter can do and what they should do. And I kind of like some of those ideas that you have. I mean, because they're kind of simple ideas. And certainly it allows people the freedom to be able to pick and choose, okay, what subject matter you want, who you want, what you want to listen to, that type of deal. And it would deal much more so. But but here's the thing that I kind of fear, because I don't know. I know that Google is having a battle with the EU, and I'm not certain of the full details. I don't know if you've been following that yourself.
I saw a little bit of it, but you're right. They're not giving us enough detail.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's important to understand. When we talk about how powerful these voices can be. I mean, these groups can be like Google or a Facebook, because in effect they're becoming the new filter in which news is run through. And
that's true. I know.
Yeah.
Well,
and the thing that always
explain to me about Google. What do you? They're saying that they need to be that one governing body, Google. But what do you think? I mean, do you agree that, first of all, I want to ask from your perspective, do you think Google is doing a good job?
No, I would say so. I'm very, Google's one of those things that makes me nervous in this regard. Like I said, they have almost complete control of the servers, in the United States. It's a tough battle to be, because I have to read more details, because I know on one side of the equation, there is a lot of government agency wanting to gain their control over what gets said as well on the internet. That's part of the battle. But Google themselves, my own experience with Google, the last couple of months would indicate to me, it's not like they're making it easier for me to root for them over the EU, because they're essentially dictating this, doing this. One of my favorite examples would be, and again, this is there are certain aspects, certain areas where if you go Google something, and here's the thing we do know about Google is that they have a political bias. This has been detailed. You've had people come out and release information from inside Google, say, we're making our decisions based on our political bias and how we're going to treat people, and we're treating certain groups different than others. That is coming. That has already come out. And that, to me, is kind of a scary aspect, because we're getting a lot of – most people get a good portion of the news service
through these, to like Facebook, Google, and one of the things that they can do, and I've seen this myself, where okay, if you look up a certain subject matter or a certain group, I've had situations I would look up an organization because I'd be curious, and you'll literally have, I had one situation with one group. I was looking at trying to get the website, and it took me 3 pages to get the website. The first 3 pages was why they were bad.
But Tom, I have to disagree with you right there. But Tom, listen, you're this is the situation. Google, and I remember listening to congressional hearing when Google's representative was there, and he made it very clear it isn't biased. Google searches are based on people's searches. So the number of people that search for something, that's what comes up first. So there is not that they're compiling their preferences and putting that in first. That's not how it goes. No,
here's where my disagreement is. I would, there's a part of me that I understand what you're saying, but there's a part of me, there's been, like I say, you've had situations where, things were leaked saying in effect there is a bias, an institutional bias that exists. And how that affects the algorithm? Is it based on what you've stated, or do they fix it? I don't know. I'm becoming more cynical on that particular score. You may be right, but there is.
Well, no. Okay, wait, listen, let me explain something. Wait, I'm going to have to really vehemently disagree with you here. The only way there can be a bias when you're talking about a collective search of individuals, and we're talking a broad spectrum of people all over the world that do a search on Google, is if everybody's mind suddenly telepathically decided to lump themselves into one topic and said, okay, we're all going to be only say, if everybody said, let's search for apples, for red, delicious apples, and that's the only apple we're going to buy in this world, so let's all search at the same time and make everybody believe that the only apple we're going to eat is a red, delicious apple, then yes, that's biasing a search on Google. But there's no way that's going to happen. And any other idea is almost like a conspiracy. It can't happen. It's a blatant misconception to think you can bias a search. You can't.
Okay,
unless, wait, let me just say, listen, I'm sorry, because this is important. Unless you're going to go I'm not saying you specifically, unless somebody is going to go so off their mind here and think that there's a group of people in some black room that's taking everybody's searches in a nanosecond and putting them together and saying, don't take those people's searches and let's compile them really quickly and pop our idea of what the search should be and pop those in first, which is ridiculous. That can't happen.
Well, let me put it this way. Here's here's where there was a report. Let me get here a couple of points here. Okay, there was a report here that was 2018 where they talked about when you go look at Google on news bias, and they make it clear when they looked at the bias that when you go put it on, the majority of the case will be one side versus the other. In this case, it was left bias. Now, I went back, and I'm now looking at the European. Now, here's what the European investigation is they're basically saying, one of the investigations is that they're accusing Google of relating preferential treatment to its Google shopping at the expense of others. And again, now, like I say, I don't know the full details, but this was essentially what it is. That they're basically accusing Google of biasing toward their shopping toward their product line, for a product line over other product lines.
Well, I mean, that's another entity. I mean, that I can, that's different. I mean, if you're going to be, if you're talking about marketing products and putting products over something else, that's different. Like I'm talking about individuals searching for something, that's one thing. But if we're talking about advertising, that's something different.
Well, here's the thing. I gotta say, because I would put it in this capacity, and this is where, because I've been that victim of Google. I guess I just introduced the social media. So to me, I'm going to say the point. How is it that I nearly got suspended, or my organization did, based on that somebody didn't lie, and be suspended and never. And we're looking at a group that's been in existence for 16 years. We've been, I play something like over 400,000 radio ads.
Mm-hmm.
Radio ads, and never had radio ads, and never had any kind of issues like this. So, if radio stations are basically saying you're okay, are you trying to tell me? Are you trying to tell me that I'm not okay with you? So I've been that victim, and my point I would be to you is, I'm going to take it now to a much larger scale. How easy it would be for a government agency, like what we're talking about in China, or down the road here in the U.S., to basically use this very same technology. So, use this technology to censor us, because this, to me, is where we're headed, regardless of whether right, left, or whatever you may be. How easy it would be, because if in fact, I'm going to hold on to that thought that I'm going to have you respond back to. This is the Donelson Files. This is Tom Donelson with Lauren Bies on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network and the Donelson Files.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Bachelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
Yes, Locker Talk with Barry Barnes, 9 a.m. Friday on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. He talks about the NFL from perspectives that you have not heard before. All right. Okay. See, this is the thing. Because I'm going to go back here. This was an article that was written in The Hill. And here's and what he kind of talked about here is, this was a quote. With incredible data collecting, the plumbing is already in place for such a system to take hold. Now, he was talking about censorship, hate speech, fines, or whatever it may be. Our tech companies catalog large quantities of data on everyone. And for those, as Cambridge Analytica. Now, for those who may not know what Cambridge Analytica is, this was actually a group that was associated first, Trump it's one of the groups that Trump used, or his campaign used, to mine information from Facebook and others, so they could tailor the ad. So if you wanted Tom Donelson, Tom Donelson, I'm going to tailor this ad that he would be interested in. And this guy said this data can be used to steer particular viewpoints. It's not a far cry to imagine this information being used to control viewpoints. And this is like I say, because I don't know if you remember the outrage, because this was about a year ago. The Cambridge Analytica story came out. Yeah,
it was a big deal.
By the way, they're not the only one who did it. In 2012, the Obama team did essentially the same thing. They had very similar situation. So, but it came down to these guys.
But what just happened with Trump though was criminal because it involved the Russians and everything else. So so let's just put it in, but let's put it in perspective. Okay, now you may continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's say we're not going to go into the Russian collusion case now.
No,
that's
we're
another
not.
debate. That's another.
But let's keep
going.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Well, let's take a follow up on that because we did. I've done stories. We've done stories in the Donelson files. One of the things I would tell people, who say to me about the Russian involvement in 2016, I say, I got news for you. They've been doing this for a century. This is nothing new. They've been doing.
No, but at least now everything's coming out. At least now everything is coming out.
Yeah, and what I would tell people is that, look, you have to understand one thing. But here's the interesting thing, because China has been doing this, and nobody talks about China's involvement. But China, for example, had the biggest hack ever of our government agencies, where they literally got millions of information, millions of government workers. They were literally, which they now have in their possession. That was in 2015.
Wow.
And when and the thing that comes into play, it goes back to what we're talking about, is how easy it is for governments, negatively or positively or negatively, to steer debate or steer issues or steer control into a certain pattern.
Well, I want to bring up because we're talking about China, but I also want to mention about Australia, because now they have what they call the deadbeat map, where they identify people of certain criminal acts, people of certain, not just criminal acts, but people of any type of, as they would call, like problem issues in society, people, economic stature, and they make this map, and it's a public. They give them scores almost, and it's accessed where any citizen can access it on the computer, but that's a horrible way of classifying someone, and it's actually that's what it's labeled as, the deadbeat map.
Well, again, that's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about because in effect, when you get to that point, you're right. I mean, when you get to that point, I mean, we're talking control in such a way that was unmanageable, unthinkable.
Right.
Decades ago. I mean, like I said, I go back to that computer instructor I had. I didn't give this one thought what he was talking up to that point, and you got to remember those too. That was for them because we kind of viewed the internet as the ability in those days, because that was one of the ways you could get information into the Iron Curtain without it being censored at that time, because the Russians and the Chinese had not figured out how to block it, and we were able to get that information there. Into now it's a complete opposite. It can be used to do the complete opposite, and this is, I mean, and this is kind of way I kind of view it as like we're kind of headed in a direction there, but here's the thing again. I'll go back to the Hill article, that you and I kind of looked at together. He said, okay, it's trendy pretending Americans enduring a 1984 fascist hellscape, but China is implementing the largest surveillance state in the history of civilization, with over 1.3 billion people. And then he added, the free world is not far behind if we don't protect privacy, deny our policymakers' desire to expand the reach of government, resist the urge to commercially or socially punish those who don't show our political ideology. And hey, remember the line we talked about at the beginning? Listen to this line. Privacy and liberty are never more than one generation from extinction.
I know, that's just so prolific and profound at the same time.
Yeah. And let me throw this out to you this way, because I'm going to kind of switch over to the entertainment side. You can try to talk to me about it because you're in the filmmaking side, you're in the entertainment side.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always kind of viewed like Netflix or Hulu or some of these streaming as mechanisms for independent filmers or unique projects that, let's say, you're not going to be able to see at the movie theater, or you're not going to see on commercial television.
Right.
But I had a couple of people say to me, that may not end up being the case, that maybe these streamers that we're looking at may themselves become the new Hollywood and put in their own mechanism that shuts out the independent filmmaker, shuts out the independents. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what's going to happen is because Netflix in particular, because of the fact that it is so large and they have so much content, all right, they're in a position to welcome more content, all right? And that's a good thing. So at this point, you have you have more opportunities, and that's good. And they've become the vehicle to allow, like what Apple's doing now. Like Apple's the last to come on board. Apple's the last to come on board to offer the streaming of like Netflix is doing. So by Apple opening up and doing the same model, then it gives more opportunities for, I don't really think at this point, for independent filmmakers to do this on their own. I don't think they have the capital to do it. I mean, you could do it. I mean, independent filmmakers do it all the time. They do it all the time. You can make films on your own. You can market it on your own. If you have the, anybody could do that really. But to really get it out there to the masses, you have the ability to do that now because there's so much money in Netflix and in Hulu, and just now HBO made the determination that they're opening up too now. HBO traditionally has been very select. They had a few big projects, and that's the way they stayed for years since their conception. But now they've changed their model, and they're going to be opening it up to just like Netflix does. They're going to have all these different genres, and they're going to, if it runs for a year, it runs for a year. It doesn't work out, they'll let it go and then bring something else in. They're not going to be so select. So I think that for right now, it's going to run like that. And independent filmmaking just by themselves, it's going to be a struggle. And I don't think anybody is going to want to go that route when they have the opportunity to still go to production company, get a little bit of backing, and then have that production company go to Netflix and then present it. That's the way you do it. You know what I'm saying? You just don't go there on your own. You need to go to production company first.
Sure. Well, here's the thing, because I'm going to throw in kind of more of a good news type of deal, because one of the conversations I've had with people like dealing with the Google, dealing with the Facebook and Twitter, is how do you break them up? How do you get them to start respecting these other points of view? But there's also the aspect of what you're just talking about is, is there a way to break the monopoly that exists to allow more voices to be heard? Because, what we're talking about is restricting voices. What you're indicating to me is the expansion of voices.
Right.
Is that the way that I could interpret what you just stated?
Absolutely. That's what's happening. See, the more content that's out there allows for more content to be out there. And that's what Netflix is doing. It's headed by a female. She's amazing. And because she's a woman of diversity, being a woman, number one, and she's also a woman of color, she has been the first to open up the idea that, we should allow not just, the traditional, the comedies and, the sitcoms to come in. And that's why we have, the more documentaries, and we have, the unique content that we never had before. And see, the thing is, like, you know how HBO always just had, they had The Sopranos, and that would run for 5 or whatever years that would go through, and then they'd have something else, and then that would be, they only had a few shows, and that was it, and it worked for them, okay? But the idea is, we are in a different age of people. We have many different people. We have people that are classifying themselves with different, genders now. So it doesn't work like that anymore. We have 100 different TV stations. So right now we have all these streaming services like Amazon, and we have to give people what they want. And so as an artist, it's an exceptional time to be around. Exceptional.
Well, let's take the lesson you just brought us here. Okay, well, let's say Netflix and all that. And by the way, on the phone we also have Dr. Larry. Dr. Larry, how you doing?
I'm just fine.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring you here in a couple minutes here, because I want to kind of leave the show on a more positive note before we turn it over to your show.
Thank you.
What we talked about, here's the thing we've talked about. We talked about the potential loss of freedom that could occur. We talked about the China social credit system and how, you're talking about the biggest surveillance system out there. And here's the throw that I would throw back to both of you, whether it's Google, Facebook, Twitter, or whether, how do we best preserve the freedoms we take for granted and prevent ourselves from being like what China is developing into with their social media credit system and surveillance system is what they're talking about. And I'll start with you first, Lauren.
I believe you have to give people the ability to be accountable for their actions, and you can't take away their own personal sense of freedom. And I really believe that Twitter should be one of the first social media sites to change some filter options, rather than have people just reporting when they're frustrated over something. That reporting option where they say, harassment, or it should not just be for sexual content. They should open up filters and allow themselves to filter out politics or anything else that they don't want to be involved in. That's what they should have more control for themselves, and not put it on, say, faceless people in Twitter, and that would disseminate frustration and everything else.
Okay, Larry, your thoughts.
Well, I came in late to the conversation, but I think freedom is fundamentally a matter of a social system and an economic system, and I would, as my latest rant is on the reform of capitalism, so that it fulfills a lot more human needs than we currently see, and but the value of it from the point of view of the contest with China is that it encourages all the creativity and all of the forward momentum that we've shown in the last 200 years, and that China's trying to steal from us.
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I want to kind of leave here with it, because here's the, to me, is I'm going to say it's vigilance. Don't take for granted that your government is going to do what, that you always have to, maybe the way I have a cynical side in the sense that I don't assume that my government is always going to do best for me. And we need to keep that vigilance on freedom, whether, the abuse that could occur as a result of that. And whether it's, re-examining the Patriot Act, for example, and looking at the NSA and say, well, 535 million emails, phone calls, and texts are being evaluated and spied on. Is it an overkill to protect us? And what kind of freedoms are we giving up? These are the things that, to me, we need to be conscious of. And that's some of the things we were talking about as well. So I would too. I'm going to go ahead, Lauren, give you the final word. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we may be a couple of minutes late with the Dr. Larry show, but don't worry. Dr. Larry's going to get his full 1 hour. So, yeah. So, and I guess I should be texting your wife because she's now saying to me, "Hey, you need to get off the air. You need to get off the air." No, don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. I have control of the board, so you will get your full 1 hour of Dr. Larry. Yeah. All right. So, Lauren, I want to give you the last word. And if you want to stick around and listen to what Dr. Larry has to say on this, it'll be interesting. I mean, I know it's midnight where you're at, but
it's midnight. I have a meeting at Trinity tomorrow morning, so I'm unfortunately going to have to pass for this evening. But I want to thank you all for your time this evening. It was a very good discussion. And Dr. Larry, it's nice to meet you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So,
it was a great discussion. Please say hello to Coco for me. And hopefully Ireland is coming up to their 5G status. They're voting on it, and soon we will have a better connection here.
Great. It sounds good. Well, thank you very much. That was Lauren Bies, the official European correspondent. This is Tom Donelson on the Donelson Files on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. And
when you hear that trumpet, you know it's the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, and I am your host for the next hour. And we are still in the throes of a discussion of what I consider one of the great issues of the day, and that is the wealth gap between the 80%, between the 1% of the population that seems to own about 80% of the wealth and all the rest of us. We've been looking for a solution to that does not involve elevating the government to the point of being the redistributor of wealth through the tax system, because of the tremendous constraints that puts on personal freedom and the ability of companies and businesses to make profits. So I confess that I have caught the fervor of a convert to this new movement, and as I write and speak and broadcast about conscientious capitalism, I feel like Paul Revere, as I keep hearing, "Wow, I never heard of conscious capitalism, but it sure sounds like the answer to a lot of our problems." Among others, this is the reaction of my fellow talk show hosts, who are generally very well informed. On the other hand, the reform of capitalism is much discussed and written about. Some examples from Amazon Books: Joel Solomon's Clean Money, Reinventing Power, Purpose, and Capitalism; Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organizations; and Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman with Raj Sisodia. I love that title. But then there's Joseph E. Stiglitz, Progressive Capitalism, as he outlined it in the Wall Street Journal on the 19th of April this year. And that's a label that he shares with Representative Ro Kahana, who is a Democrat representative from California, and who uses the term, by the way, of progressive capitalism more to describe a concept closer to conscious capitalism than to Stiglitz's dreary views. And of course, the opposition still flourishes, as in Nick Beam's The Fraud of Progressive Capitalism and the World Socialist website. And by the way, that Beam sounds very much like Karl Marx with 20th century inserts. There's no room in Beam's world for an honest capitalist. I am coming to the conclusion that the so-called socialist trend among our younger Americans, which is so widely reported by the news and pollsters, is really a popular name for opposition to what I've been calling the wealth gap. That is, the inequality of wages and other assets between the very rich and the rest of us. This disparity is causing an expanding demand for a solution. For big government liberals, the answer is another government program, whether the guaranteed $1,000 per adult citizen of Andrew Wang or the ever-expanding welfare state of Bernie Sanders. I frankly doubt if very many of the so-called supporters of socialism could even define the term. They are not true socialists. They are simply angry Americans. They, like so many of us, have never heard of a capitalist solution to the wealth gap. And it's time that they did here. So I propose conscious capitalism as the best way to answer that question because, number one, it has a 10-year history of practical accomplishment. Number two, it has an organizational structure already in place. Number three, it has a literature, a very vigorous literature describing it. And most of all, it has a legion of 1,600 companies who employ 3 million people. The movement includes such outstanding companies as Southwest Airlines, Federal Express, Whole Foods Market, and Starbucks. But the best way to describe an organization is in its own words. So here's the conscious capitalist credo. We believe that business is good because it creates value. It is ethical because it is based on a voluntary exchange. It is noble because it can elevate our existence. And it is heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and creates prosperity. Free enterprise capitalism is the most powerful system for social cooperation and human progress ever conceived. It is one of the most compelling ideas we humans have ever had. But we can aspire to even more. Conscious capitalism is a way of thinking about capitalism and business that better reflects where we are in the human journey, the state of our world today, and the innate potential of business to make a positive impact on the world. Conscious businesses are galvanized by higher purposes that serve, align, and integrate the interests of all of their major stakeholders. Their higher state of consciousness makes visible to them the interdependencies that exist across all stakeholders, allowing them to discover and harvest synergies from situations that otherwise seem replete with trade-offs. They have conscious leaders who are driven by service to the company's purpose, all the people in the business touches, and the planet we all share together. Conscious businesses have trusting, authentic, innovative, and caring cultures that make working there a source of both personal growth and professional fulfillment. They endeavor to create financial, intellectual, social, cultural, emotional, spiritual, physical, and ecological wealth for all their stakeholders. Conscious businesses will help evolve our world so that billions of people can flourish, leading lives infused with passion, purpose, love, and creativity. A world of freedom, harmony, prosperity, and compassion. Now, this movement is idealistic, but it works. Religion is also idealistic, but it does carry a club. We all know that humans are capable not only of great good, but also of great evil. One of the greatest achievements of American capitalism has been its success in limiting the excesses of capitalism. The two major restraining forces on American capitalism have been laws and unions. And the way to a disciplined capitalist system in this country has been led by organized labor. Labor has been responsible for the elimination of child labor, for the 40-hour work week, for due process in firing, paid vacations, pensions, and health care. And I think it is time for labor to take its rightful role in reforming capitalism. There are only two options to the distribution of wealth in this country: the coercion of government using a tax system, or voluntary reform of capitalism through a redefinition of workers' rights to include profit sharing. In conscious capitalism, the entire supply chain is deemed responsible for the success or failure of a business. As the major contributor to that supply chain, labor deserves a major share either way, whether for failure or success. Conscious companies understand that equation. The difference between today's standard and the reformed standard is the size and form of the labor share. That is yet to be determined, and it undoubtedly will differ according to circumstances. But the best way to develop a mutually agreeable outcome is for both sides through collective bargaining. And the role of the union is critical because its role is non-governmental. It is the first line of defense. Only if it fails does government get involved through lawsuits and enforcement. The private sector remains private, and freedom continues to reign. So, let's do it. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
Hey, this is L.A. Bachelor reminding you to join us on the Donelson Files with your host, Tom Donelson and Coco Constantly. Join them and listen to all the topics and discussions on Mondays on WCOMFM.org or on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at blogtalkradio.com/LA Bachelor. It is politics that you've never heard before on the Donelson Files. And if you miss any part of their broadcast, you can listen to the podcast at our website, thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network, and we're now at the point in the program where we introduce our guest, and tonight is a very familiar person to all of the Bachelor Pad Network listeners, Tom Donelson. And Tom, thanks for coming on tonight.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy being on the show.
I guess the first question is, would you care to make a reaction to my opening statement?
I'm going to, my first, I got two reactions. So, and I have to be honest, because I do take somewhat of a different point of view on the inequality side of the equation, because in any any society, free market in particular, inequality is always going to exist. That's not the real question to me has always been the opportunity. Can you move up the economic ladder? Or as we were discussing in the last show, a point that was made when Marco Rubio said, what's so great about America is you're not born into the status that you'll live for the rest of your life. You can change that status. And so maybe the point I would make here is this. When I look at just the last 30 years, if you look at the economic history, you will see the 80s and the 90s, inequality did increase. But what else increased was the fact that people at the bottom moved up the economic ladder. You had more people moving into the middle class that moved backwards. And certainly the discussion we're having today was not, if you would have sat back in the 1990s and if Bernie Sanders was a backbencher, nobody paid attention to him. The progressive capitalism you talked about, or the third way, essentially was the Democratic model. They weren't out to destroy capitalism, but maybe reform it at the edges. You didn't see the same kind of pressure there are several things you saw going in the 80s and the 90s. First of all, number one, you saw an increase in income going up, but you also saw something else, an increase of wealth, where what I call the investor class, where people saw investments, they started participating, and they started to see their overall wealth go up. So it wasn't just whether it's the price of your house, whether it's your investment, your 401ks, your IRAs. These were things that people became party to. And certainly this is a point that the conscious capitalist will talk about, the investment into your workers and your workers' investment into their company as well. These are the things you saw. We saw an average of growth of 3.5-4%, which aided all of this. Here's the problems that I see, and this is where I think, you see the frustration of a lot of millennials, as an example, a lot of younger people, and even let's say some of the middle class people, is that you saw wealth stagnate. You saw the average growth, instead of seeing 4%, we're seeing 2% growth. I mean, we've only had 2 years, maybe 3, depends how you count 2018, where you had growth 3% high or higher. 3%, I mean, that's out of 19 years. You saw a decline in the investment class. You saw the decline in entrepreneurship. And you saw the decline in overall wealth being created. And I think that this is part of this, and you and I have had this discussion before, and I know you've had it with others. How do you make that discussion? And certainly, when I look at the conscious capitalist, part of their aspects that they're coming in, if I understand it, because is that it's an investment in people, investment in the company. Having create a business culture that makes it more fun to come to that place, to come to work, and be part of something bigger than yourself. I mean, these are all things, but I think in the final analysis, it's also what kind of policies you're going to have. You make the point, there's only so much government can do to create wealth. The wealth creators are people like, let's say, I cannot think of the top of his name, the gentleman who runs, John Mackey is not the gentleman's name who runs Whole Foods. Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, these are, and this is a point where we need to be talking about. I mean, one of the things I don't see going in 2020, is a conscious effort to talk about how we're going to create wealth, how we're going to move people up the economic ladder. What we're talking about is taking a pie that's not growing and splitting it, as opposed to expanding the pie so more people can move up.
Well, that's not what conscious capitalism is all about. They're all about expanding the pie.
Yeah. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And we make the question of, and that's what I'm talking about is, we're not, here's the thing, maybe the point that I would make to the listeners, a program in which and maybe to follow up on the point you've been making, is we're not talking about the creation of wealth, expanding the pie. And this is maybe where the conscious capitalists will come in the sense that how do you, creating a bigger pie to participate?
Well, I can tell you how I got into this. I started worrying about. I did some research, and I kept hearing about these so-called socialists that were talking. They weren't talking about socialism in the sense that we have a classic definition of socialism as the government ownership of the means of production. They were just talking about getting a bigger distribution of wealth, and there was a lot. See, what you're saying about the 90s, the 90s and in the early 2000s is true. There was an expansion of an enormous expansion of productivity, and therefore of wealth. but it was spotty, and there were a lot of people left out. In fact, a lot of people got displaced because of the digital revolution, and also because American companies started going overseas for cheap labor. And there's those people. I believe, and my research. Now, Tom, you have a sort of a grassroots grasp of some of the stuff that I'm seeing in statistics, but my perception is that these are the people that got very, very disgruntled about the whole way that their life was going, and they're the ones that revolted. And I believe that they had the reason that they voted for Barack Obama because the first time anyway, because they wanted something different, and I think they voted for Donald Trump for the same reason, and a lot of the same people. And how do you deal with that? And I see nothing in the on the conservative side of the political spectrum that addresses the issue of getting a capitalistic version of distribution of wealth. If you look at the graphs of the advance of productivity since 1983, when they really started measuring this, you'll see that they started out. There 40% of the nation's wealth was in the hands of the 40 of the middle class. But then once the digital revolution came about and all the other stuff, that graph just went straight up to the point of now you've got about really 2 or 3% of the people own about 80% of all the assets. And we're a consumer economy. That's not going to work, because we need a lot of consumption to keep that engine reared up and raring to go. So how do we solve that? And the way, fundamentally, if you want to talk about it in economic terms, the way that the conscious capitalists do it is that they spread the wealth significantly within the company, and you don't have the owners or the investors taking out 70-80% of the value. One of the reasons that they're all so successful is they don't pay that much. They don't pay their executives as well as some of the traditional companies, and they have a lot less G&A expenses and so on and so forth. So that really is, and it's an idea. The other aspect of it is that they present it more as a way of thinking about business, and it makes business a really noble thing to be doing. And people get dedicated to it, and they go forward. And by the way, they very heartily endorse entrepreneurship too, because most of them are entrepreneurs originally. So anyway, I came at this because I was concerned that in 2020, if we don't do something on the conservative side to try to solve this problem, we're going to get beat. We're going to get whacked, especially if Mr. Trump stumbles and doesn't pull off one of these miracles that he's trying. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
Hey, this is L.A. Bachelor reminding you, if you're looking for real discussion on sports, politics, religion, and other topics, you need to join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern at WCOMFM.org, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. at blogtalkradio.com/LA-Bachelor, and on Thursdays at the same web address. Follow us on Facebook at Pad Nation, on Twitter, Pad Nation, 2 at Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email us with your requests, your comments, your concerns, anything you want at our email address at labachelor with a T, BATCHELOR 40 at gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Pad Nation Instagram. And of course, if you missed any part of our broadcast, make sure you go to thebachelorpadnetwork.com and listen and enjoy the Bachelor Pad.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. We're talking with Tom Donelson about the whole issue of the wealth gap that does as part of our political landscape as well as our financial landscape. And Tom has a lot of background from the on the practical side of politics. And Tom, I think we have a question from the audience here. You're on the Dr. Larry Show.
Sorry.
Listener? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I've heard a few things from the libertarian side of things as far as trying to address this. I don't think their answers are really good, though, because they're mostly about UBI and stuff like that. So, yeah, you're right. There hasn't been a groundswell for conservatives to kind of come up with different concepts on this. But I think we're dealing with a dilemma of people have a certain ideology, and because they believe certain things to be true, it's hard for them to operate outside of it. I've heard you guys slip and say free market a few times, as if we've ever had one. And I think that's at the meat of the issue when you get to why haven't conservatives figured out a way to, address this problem. And the problem is essentially this. When you had globalization, we had a situation where now unions really had no power to negotiate, really had no power to hold on to any gains that they had made in the past. So they just kept losing time after time at the negotiating table, and after a while, workers said, to hell with them if they're not going to, actually go to bat for me and bring back anything worth something. But when somebody can threaten to just move your job, there's not much, the union can do. So we're going to have to empower unions. We're going to have to get back to an idea called the commons, meaning things done for the common good. Not because we're altruistic, nice folk, but because you want to have a country, because you want your country to succeed. And I think when you start talking about compassionate capitalism, basically you're saying, can the foxes design the new hen house? And I just don't think that's realistic, man. If you're a compassionate capitalist and you walk into that board meeting and say you're going to keep the jobs here because you're a patriot and you want Americans, well, they're going to get you out of there and put somebody there who will do it because the returns on capital are too huge for people to go with sentiment. So I think even going this direction, we're going the wrong way. No, I think we have to address this from the standpoint of what is good for the country and how do we introduce policy that will actually work. Not trampling on people's freedom, but just the idea that you're going to need a country to govern. And for a country to govern, people are going to have money to consume. And also, you kind of want the whole liberty and pursuit of happiness thing to be true. So we cannot continue down this route. I heard someone say something about, inequality always exists. Yes, but how drastic is that inequality? And when we use terms like middle class in this day and age, my God, that group of folks is so small that even using that as any kind of metric, man, we're having the wrong conversation. So either way, man, I think Dr. Larry has kind of changed course a lot in the last couple of weeks, and he's been talking about ideas that people aren't talking about. So respect to you for doing it, because this is really different than the conversation before the summer that you guys were having about some of these things, man. So I appreciate the conversation because this is interesting, but I got to push back on this idea that the same class who is, extracted so much wealth. Like tonight, Google labor's share of GDP from the past 30 years to now, and people will get an indicator of what we're actually dealing with.
Well, you're right. I confess to being a convert. So I have indeed changed my stripes on this somewhat. But the only thing the two things that have made me think that this is feasible is, number one, this movement has actually grown to really in the last 2 or 3 years to over 1,600 companies and 3 million workers, including some really big companies. And one of the reasons, I think, is because it's been proven that these companies are amazingly successful. I mean, I'm talking financially successful. And if it were not for that, I would be putting it aside as simply an idealistic dream of some former hippies or something. But these guys they're really trying to remake the whole thrust of business, the definition of business. You know, the idea that business, the only purpose of business is to make money for the shareholders, which Friedman made popular in the 1980s. That is definitely gone by the by with these folks. These guys say that making profit is a means to an end, and the end is to provide society with some particular service or product that they need and want and will buy, and they have to buy a lot of it. So if this weren't practical, I tell you, I wouldn't be on with it.
If Friedman was as wrong about that as he is now, and the only retort I would give would be some Jeffersonian Jackson nonsense, the old school saying corporations neither bodies to be kicked or souls to be damned. And at a certain point, we gotta I think start treating corporations as what they are, as opposed to kind of putting them in. I don't know, man. We kind of treat them with a deference that's kind of similar to nobility, and I just don't think that they're going to police themselves. I just don't think that that's realistic. I think a more realistic way is to say, okay, I know some people are so terrified of the tyranny of government, but there can't be huge corporates and plutocrats who are, gigantic, standing over government, influencing and directing government to the point to where government can't affect them. Hell, Facebook is willing to write a check for that little $8 billion fine or whatever it is, that's being brought forward to them. You know what I mean? Like, think about that, man. That's how huge, the J.P. Morgans of the day would have. Man, they rolling over in their grave saying, man, if I'd have been alive now, I really would have been a corporate raider. Like, what those guys did compared to now is,
Well, that's true.
Okay, can I jump in? Yeah, can I jump in? Because there's some misconception here. First of all, number one, I'm going to make the point that I made. You and I have disagreed on this, but I'll say very clearly. You look in the 80s and the 90s. There are two things that did happen. You had a broad-based increase of wealth across the board. It may have been unequal, but it existed. If you look at the middle class grew. The interest aspect of the middle class, yeah, it shrank, but the majority of those people didn't go to the poor side. They went to the upper income. So, and as I stated earlier, if you look at the other, various creation of wealth, example, entrepreneurship, starting new businesses. If you look at, you look at those, or the creation of wealth where people saw their overall wealth created. That's not a debatable point. It worked. And it worked because basically you saw a conscious effort to keep spending in line. The traditional things that people take for granted. I would take it a step further. Now, a step further, if you look at the list of economic freedom, there are a lot of organization groups that do economic freedom. They have one thing in mind: the more economically free a country is, the wealthier it is, and the more politically free it is. I mean, there's all connection there. I don't necessarily say that the idea of saying free market hasn't worked. No, if you want to say perfect free market, we don't have perfect free market, but we have enough of a market system that it works. And if Now, the real question comes into play is how far you want to take it. For example, I know some of the models that you look at is like Sweden or Denmark, but let's remember, Sweden and Denmark have a robust welfare state, but they also have a functioning private market, which they have reformed over the years to keep the golden goose, allowing it to produce the welfare state that they have. So I'm not necessarily.
Well, I just want to respond to what you said. I don't even really get into the whole, this side, team this, team that nonsense, because the majority of countries who are doing well have mixed economies. There are socialist ideas and concepts that work in some industries and some where that doesn't. And you need, straight capitalism in those industries. And that's what the majority of countries who are doing well are doing. Your 80s and 90s details, I would suggest we go to the data, because that's just not only untrue, but that's dangerously untrue. Back in those days, we had a welfare roll so swollen that they had to come up with welfare reform, and then it was what? Welfare to work. And what happened? People were so-called trained in these new industries that would be coming around, and those industries never came around. So people went from foremen to call centers, and then down the value chain all the way down to Walmart greeters. And this happened all over Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, Illinois. Like, this happened all over the country. So this idea that the 80s and 90s were some kind of great time for everyone and things weren't as they are now, no, we were seeing the beginning of what, a lot of conservatives talk about when they talk about globalization and GATT and NAFTA and, some of these treaties that ended up being a decline in living standards and wealth for those people of that period. So don't tell me about the 80s and 90s and say, oh, this was the good time. No, that was the harbinger of things to come. And when we saw the things that came, and those things that came were what? Mass incarceration, mass deportation of jobs and, different factories. Because, look, man, everybody's not going to get a degree. We need something here for regular folk who are willing to sweat and break their back to be able to raise a family, have a home, and to do all the things that people need to do. We're not going to gig economy our way out of this.
Well, you're actually both right. It was spotty. What happened was we had a great constant increase in wealth, but we also had great poverty, and we had a lot of people that bought the stock and did well, and then other people that went basically down to as you say, down to Walmart. Pete. So we're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Bachelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. If you are interested in following my work, you might look on my website, which is drlarryonline.com, DRLARRY online.com, and also in the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.com. You'll see my columns and also Tom's articles as well as other all the podcasts are on that website. So we're talking about how do we resolve this issue that we are trying to. At least I am very concerned about getting a better distribution of wealth. I find that it's highly unethical for the people that do the inventing and owning of these enterprises make 90% or 80% of all the wealth, and everybody else, the whole supply chain, including the workers, including the customers, including the suppliers, and they all come up short and end up having to live from paycheck to paycheck. And to the extent that is true, there is a lot of resistance against that politically, and I am quite concerned that in the 2020 election that's going to play a big part unless we can come up with some other better solutions that are much more in keeping with the freedom of American business. Because as Tom, you said that government can't do much to create wealth. The fact is they can't create any wealth. That is to say, they can't create profits. It takes business to create profits, and if you don't have business, then if your business is not free to innovate and to move ahead and try to find new ways of doing things, then the whole thing's going to stagnate. And that's why I am very concerned that we get into a much more productive and benign mode as far as business is concerned. But I know you guys have both got other ideas, so anybody wants to chip in, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me kind of go in kind of this, in this direction, because I don't want to leave misconceptions. Because here's the bottom line, and this is a point that I've made in the past. Is it's not just about inequality, but the creation of wealth and making the pie bigger. And we're not necessarily talking about that. When you look at the 80s,
well, we are
90s,
though.
What you saw, yeah. But here's the thing: you look in the 80s and the 90s. What you saw was we looked at the regulation side of the equation was looked at seriously. You had solid monetary policy. You did have a taxes. You basically looked at the idea of taxes being, the tax system being changed to encourage growth, and all those things occurred. You can't deny that it did occur. You can make the whatever word you may spot it. That could be true of any particular political era. Here's the thing and you're right about this course. Whether if we don't talk about how you improve growth, you don't talk about how you expand the pie, we will lose. And this is one of the problems we do have at this moment. And the other aspect that the gentleman picked up on the side, let's take the side of education. I would like to have people listen to the show I did on May the 16th with John Hinderacker. And we got into this discussion about blue-collar jobs because he does a lot of research in the Minnesota area. And he talked about the fact that in Minnesota, the opportunity for a lot of the blue-collar jobs not only exist, but they're not necessarily, but we need to start encouraging it. The way he put it was, you got, for example, junior colleges that emphasize those jobs producing ideas. You have states that have a lot of resources, like in the case of Minnesota, you have mining in the northeast part of the state that can produce more increased wealth. In other words, looking at these blue-collar jobs that, in the past we have looked at and disdained are in fact available to us. But the one thing comes into play, first one on the overall side of the plane, you can't keep spinning around at 2% growth and expect, let's say, those at the bottom to move up. But you can, and that's one of the aspects you have to come into play. We have to expand that pie. And there are ways we know how to do that, through the tax system, to the regulatory system, but also encouraging entrepreneurship and encouraging more of those people that you're talking about in your conscious capitalism. They don't exist in the vacuum. They exist as an overall strategy where government, can do is encourage the rise of these corporations to do and compete and make job creation more important. But if we're not going to talk about job creation, we're going to talk about what the government can do for us. And certainly when you look at the Democratic side in particular, what are they talking about? They're talking about what government can do, what government can create, and in the long run. And there is no solution there because they're not talking about expanding the pie. Now, where I am impressed with your conscious capital side of the equation is they're talking about expanding the overall pie while, looking at their workers as assets, not in an adversary side of the equation. And certainly
and also they have an international world view. part of their whole mission is to look at the world situation, world distribution of wealth, and try to encourage freedom and entrepreneurship and conscious capitalism in all of these other countries. And as far as government's concerned, frankly, Tom, I have a lot of experience with government. That's one thing I know about. And I'll tell you this, I am firmly of the belief that the government cannot do anything well. It's amazing that we've won the wars that we've won, because it just gets so overloaded with people with yes men that they just can't seem to get anything. So our caller is still with us, sir.
Yeah,
What's your name, sir?
Yeah.
What's your name?
Yeah, this is Naj. I'd like to respond to the last two statements. Not only do I think these statements are dangerous, I think these statements are somewhere like deep in the American subconscious because of how we won against the British. This idea of always worried about the tyranny of government. And essentially, these other countries we were talking about who do well, they don't actually fear their government. They see their government as part of the process. That's it. They're there to regulate. They're there to do the services that they're equipped to do, and that's it. Like, nobody's talking about government interference to the point of where you can't do business, or government interference that would cause stagnation. Like, nobody's saying that. Like, why would we assume the worst argument from the other side? No. What I'm saying is it's less likely that people are going to voluntarily give their wealth away than it is that we can have a real system in place to say, okay, look, this is where the leaks are. Apple paid no taxes at all. GM paid no taxes at all. We got corporators who, spend their money through Delaware and through Las Vegas to the point to where they don't have to pay anything. And when you do that continually, you put the burden on what? The declining middle class and everyone else in cost and consumption and goods and everything else. So at a certain point, man, you guys are basically saying that the people who are taking their unfair share of the pie now, if the pie was bigger, then they would be a lot more fair about it. And I just think you guys are naive, because if what you say was true, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing right now. That's what I'm trying to say to you. And,
what they're doing right now is because the culture they're in is rapacious, and that is what has to be changed. And it's not going to change. It's the laws are not going to change it, nor are anything. The only thing that's going to change it is competition and new ideas. And that's what these conscious capitalist guys are trying to do. And in fact, they're being pretty darn successful, Frank, from starting from almost nothing. And as far as the free market part is concerned, I've never advocated a free market, because if we had just allowed capitalism to go without any restraint, we would still be we'd still be in the position of having child labor and all the things that happened in the 18th and 19th century. So the government has a role. The government definitely has a role, but the role is passive. It's an enforcement. It's a restraint. It's like the umpire in a ball game. It's not to get out there and try to create wealth, because they can't do it. They just don't know how, and there's nothing in their DNA that allows it. So we've got another. So we've got somebody. I'm getting a prompt here that I don't understand. Oh, Tom. Yeah. Well, so that's my view. And Tom, you want to get in on this?
Okay. Here, let me put it this way. There's nothing dangerous about what you and I are saying. If anything, it is basically common sense that comes into play. You sit back and say, yeah, because there's a limit to what government can do. Before it becomes an obstacle. Yeah, and so this is, and let me throw the point back in this way. If you look at the history, what I've stated from the very beginning, and what I'll say here today, is that there is mechanism to increase the wealth. We know how to do that. We've been doing it for 300 years. And when I use the word, and one of the things I want to kind of correct a misconception here, I'm a kind of a firm believer, for those people who may have read the books of Michael Novak, who recently passed away on democratic capitalism. He talked about ordered liberty, and what he meant, in effect, he wasn't saying that government doesn't play a role. In fact, of anything, our founding fathers, all the way through, let's say, ordered liberty, believed that government was designed to protect the rights of the individual, protect the rights that we are existing with. And certainly, they never stated, we're not anarchists or even a libertarian side of the equation, but a government that does have a role in protection, as you stated, as part of ordered liberty. Nobody's even making that argument. The argument that I would make, is very simple. I look at what my opponents are saying. When I see people talking tax rates of 70% plus, we're talking tax rates that no Scandinavian politician would dare to impose on their own country, let it be imposed. So there are limits, and so I am looking at what my opponents are in fact proposing. What they're proposing is far more leftist than anything you would see in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, or any of these other countries. While they may be a more robust welfare state that we have, there certainly is more than enough market economy to keep the golden goose going.
Well, one of the things that we're up against really is an historical bias that happened really in the 1930s, and that is that first it was labor, and then virtually all of the underclass people that you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network. Before I forget, I would like to make one other point about this conscious capitalist movement. The guys that we are dealing. I was talking to the head of the association this afternoon, and he really is very convinced that they can do this in a bipartisan, or at least a nonpartisan way. They have no interest in getting identified with the current political issues that are before the electorate. They're assuming that their members are pretty active people and that they'll get in there and do it themselves. So, I guess I'm not sure I've got my arms around that idea yet, but anyway, that's what he was telling me. And Tom, you want to come in here?
Yeah, here I got a couple of questions for you because we've talked about the conscious capitalist, their goals, in a more generalized term, and yourself. Let me ask you this question, and maybe based on your conversation with these individuals, what are their actual solutions? I mean, it's not just what I'm going to ask you is, okay, what would they see a tax system should be? What are they looking at as far as the education system, what it needs to be, which is something, by the way, you've got a lot of experience in, unlike most people. So
right.
What do they tell you? If they say to you, when you say to them, what's an economic system, what will I say the version of taxes and budget, what should we be looking at? What did they tell you?
Well, what they're saying they're saying so far is that their job is to promote this view and action in individual companies, and that the purpose of the organization is really not to do anything from a political point of view. It's more, how do I make my company more conscious, and here are some of the problems that I have. If you want to see how well organized they are, though, you take a look at they've got a new book out, which is called the Conscious Capitalism Field Guide. It's a really exhaustive how to do type of a book about all the different kinds of problems and solutions that people have. But so far, their entire focus is non-political and non-economic per se. I mean, it's accounting and the typical type of mathematics that you do in business. But so far, their approach has been extremely non-political, to the extent that they don't seem to have any. They're not even particularly involved with the political press. In fact, they're considering me kind of a pioneer, because I've penetrated the wall of getting to them and finding out that they're there and so on. So and that is one of the things that has got me kind of baffled. I'm not so sure that I think that's really going to help the. I just don't know. I mean, I could see over a period of a generation how that would change. If you got, instead of 1,600, if you had 16,000 or 16 million companies that were conscious capitalists, that would obviously change things. But I really don't think that they have an answer to that kind of an issue. In fact, I know they don't. I asked them that. I've got another meeting with him on Friday. So if you want,
that's what's asking, because here's the problem I see. I mean, I understand, because I've read John Mackey's books.
Oh yeah,
I know he wrote a book on this. So
yeah, he did.
So I have actually read. So I've actually read his book, and I know that he came from the libertarian ranks per se, as opposed to, I don't view him in that particular regard, but I'm still. What I'm looking for when I read their pages is, okay, what do you plan to do to make this? Because what you're telling me is, what I'm hearing from you on the conscious capitalist is, okay, look, we're going to work on company by company by company. Call it a micro approach.
Yeah,
but
grassroots.
You're in a grassroots, but you're in a political situation where, quite honestly, you have one political party that's moved sharply to the left. You have another one that's grappling between being a free market conservative party to go along with a very populist route, and trying to combine the two. And so, I mean, as I kind of, so the point that I would make to, and this is the question I would love to be able to discuss with them, because it's all nice and wonderful to say, well, we're going to be bipartisan. Well, that's nice and wonderful, but eventually you got to make a decision. Okay, which way do we go? Which kind of a platform do we have to make our dream possible, to make this thing possible? So,
well, it's I mean, I can see why they would say that they're not going to do that. I mean, it'd be like the Cancer Association saying, well, that's not a good example either, is it? But maybe the YMCA or somebody that says, we're interested in our thing here, and people get healthy by going to our gyms, and they can get out and do whatever they want. My point to them is, you guys got to have a lot of freedom to be able to do what you want to do, and you don't want a lot of government interference in that. And if you don't want that, then you don't want big government. And
Now let me put this on a more positive note, okay? And maybe the question I'll throw back to, maybe you throw back to them, because one of the issues that I find, because one of the questions that we have asked over the past couple of weeks is, we'll ask people, when you think of socialism, what do you think of? Do you think of Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, or do you think of Finland, Denmark, and Sweden? And what we're finding is a lot of people, when they look at socialism, they kind of, I would say, a lot of them view it, or more like Sweden or Finland, as opposed to Venezuela. So they have and so to me, the question I would say to a conscious capitalist, if you want, the major thing you could do is make a moral case, because this is what's missing, is a moral case for free market economics, capitalism. Why?
And they're well on the way to that too.
Yeah.
They're well on the way to that.
Yeah. And that, to me, is probably the most important thing we have, because, and one of the things that I see in my own research that we do is I use the word, when I tell donors and I tell other operatives, this is a value election. And when I use the word value, I do it in a much more broader sense of what kind of society do you envision it to be. Do you want to be a free market society where freedom, prevails in your economic choices? Do you want to be a more government interventionist, a socialist society? Do you believe in certain values like hard work, as a means of moving up? Or do you believe that smart people can run your lives? I mean, essentially, those are the kinds of things that we ask people. And when we ask the question in this way, we're basically saying to them, what's your vision of America? How do you see America? And that's the one aspect that, maybe I see where this group can come in and play, is make a moral case, because to me, socialism is immoral. I'm not even going to use the word. It's immoral, because it's about taking freedom away. When you look at what's going on in Venezuela, that's the end game of socialism. Your thoughts? I mean, it's your show. I just took early.
Well, but that I agree. In fact, that's been one of the big attractions to me as I read their literature and I talk to them. They are basically on a moral. I don't want to use the word crusade. They're on a moral mission to try to do good, basically, and that they've got a very practical application of how do you do good, and namely, you've got your stakeholders and your workers and your managers, and they're not managers, by the way, they're leaders, and that all your shareholders and your board and whoever. So this is the mission that they are trying to get themselves on top of, and actually to not only get it working here, but to work wherever they can. I think we're out of time, and so we're going to have to say thank you to our caller, and thank you to Tom for coming in and sharing his ideas with us. And I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, and I'm going to say good night, and God bless everybody.